Good morning, guys. It feels like the perfect night to study some psychology. So let us welcome the father of American psychology, Dr. William James, everyone. Woohoo!
I was in this amazing time machine and I decided to make a little trip to the future. I saw this campus and I asked myself, why not? So, are you students ready to learn from the most reliable source?
Of course, we all are. Aren't we, guys? Dr. James, you are legend. Wait for it, dairy. So the IB psychology teacher, Mr. Cushman, wants the kids to have some fun. So he decided to take them outside the world of books and he wants them to learn from you. What do you say? Are you ready to answer some questions?
Of course, I'm ready. Anything for you, Ryan Cushman.
Let's get started. So, what are the principles of the biological level of analysis?
Well, I like to call it the BLOA, because it's cooler. So there are four principles that define the biological level of analysis. Let's take a look here. Behavior has a physiological basis, and this basically focuses on the physiological factors that affect behavior, like the neurotransmitters, the hormones, and the genes. Behavior can be inherited. I know this is a bit shocking. And this basically says that some behaviors may have a genetic explanation, so there's a link between genes and behavior. Also, evolutionary processes may influence behavior. This principle is basically about adaptation to the environment. So the evolutionary processes play a role in genetic mutations and transmissions in order for an individual, or you guys, let's say, to adapt to the environment that you live in. Finally, the last one, which is the most important to me, animal studies provide insight to human behavior. 7 to 8% of the physiological research involves the use of animals. Isn't that cool? I find this the coolest. Researchers use animals that have similar brain functions as humans, and the experiments on animals, believe it or not, made important contributions to medicine and psychology.
Wow, interesting. Well, I know you witnessed some case studies and experiments. I know the kids are dying to learn about this stuff.
Of course. Well, let me tell you something, kids. Some of it was not pretty. There was a case study on this poor guy, Phineas Gage. I remember him. May he rest in peace. It took place in 1994, and it explains the first principle of the BLOA. Phineas Gage suffered a personality change after an iron shot through his brain. I know it's a bit disturbing, but you guys gotta learn this. Imaging techniques were used to reconstruct the path of the iron rod. Three-dimensional model of Gage's skull was created, and it was pretty cool. I remember seeing that. It showed the iron bar went through the prefrontal areas of the brain, and it showed that there's a link between a specific part of the brain and the emotional reasoning that took place. So, let's talk about behavior and genes. Many studies, as you all know, showed a link between genes and behavior, and this link has been researched through correlational studies. The Minnesota twin study that took place in 1979, I think. Yeah, I think 1979. I don't remember. You guys. I've lived for a long time, and I've witnessed a lot. So basically, they separated twins from across the world, and they found that even though the twins are separated, they have similar personalities, interests, and attitudes. This shows that similarities between twins are due to the genes, not the environment. Let's talk about the evolutionary processes. In 1999, a study by Chartrand and Bark took place, and they examined the human's tendency to imitate each other's body postures, gestures, speaking accents, and behaviors. And the study showed that all the people who were being imitated were the ones who were liked the most, and the ones who were the most interactive and social. And like the people who are popular, yeah, like me, people used to imitate me back then. This tells us something, kids. It tells us that the environment affects the behavior. Those people acted a certain way in order to fit in the environment that they were in. Now let us talk about my favorite. Let's talk about the animals, the animal studies. The animals have been used to study the brain. So basically, I like to talk about Martinez and Kessner because they conducted a pretty cool experiment on rats in 1991. They wanted to see the role of acetylcholine on memory. I'm sure you guys know that hormone. And the rats were trained to go through a maze. One group of rats was injected with a hormone that decreases available acetylcholine in the body, and the other group was injected with a hormone that increases acetylcholine. The rats that had an increase in acetylcholine had a stronger memory and were able to go through a maze quickly, which shows that acetylcholine plays a great role in memory. Tells us that those rats that had acetylcholine were able to go through the maze quickly and they remembered the way. But those rats who had a decrease in acetylcholine were stuck and they were slower.
Thank you, Dr. James. I'm surprised you remember all of that. So, what are some effects of the environment on physiological processes?
Well, let me discuss. Notice how I say discuss. It's an important command term, discuss. I heard that Mr. Ryan Cushman has been haunting you with those command terms. Well, let's use them now. In the 1960s, some people came up with this weird hypothesis, and it basically said that the brain is influenced by genetics only, and that the brain is unchangeable. But this has been proven wrong, and let me prove it to you wrong right now. The brain interacts with the environment. It is shaped by experience. The behavior in the environment can change the brain. They can modify the brain. The brain changes as a response to the environmental input. Environmental enrichment can modify the brain. The brain plasticity, I'm sure you guys are familiar with that, is the brain's ability to rearrange the connections between its neurons. Those changes occur as a result of learning or experience. So when you learn, the arrangements change. And so your brain is shaped differently every time you learn something new. The changes take place in order for an individual to adapt to the environment. In 1972, Rosenzweig and Bennett carried out a study to show brain plasticity. They placed rats into two environments. One of them was enriched with toys, that's pretty cool, and the other one was deprived without any toys. The rats had to spend 30 to 60 days, and then, unfortunately, they were sacrificed. Back then, we had to kill the animals. Postmortem studies of their brains showed that the rats that had been in the enriched environment had an increased thickness in the cortex, the frontal lobe, which is responsible for planning, thinking, deciding. This shows us that the environment affects the brain, that the environment that the rats were placed in affected their brain.
Wow, that's pretty interesting. So, would you please talk to us about a study that has to do with the localization of brain function?
Interesting. Listen to this, guys. The brain carries out different functions. Damage to a specific part of the brain may result in damage in its corresponding function. Let's talk about some assumptions, since our command term here is examine. There's a generalization that functions spread across large regions of the brain. So if a damage occurs to one small area, it causes only slight loss of function. This argument could be proven wrong by Broca's case study that took place in 1861. The patient's name was Tan because he could only say the word Tan. That's pretty funny, isn't it? He had a hard time expressing his thoughts in writing and couldn't complete sentences. When Broca studied Tan's brain, he found out that there's a lesion in the left frontal lobe. This means that this area of the brain is responsible for language. They later called this area Broca's area because he's the one who discovered it. This is how it used to work back then. You find out something, you discover something, you become famous for it. Pretty funny. That is why when this area got damaged, Tan had a problem with his language.
Well, this was great, Dr. James. We certainly enjoyed this. And you know a lot. Mr. Cushman better be happy.
Well, I hope so. I'd like to wrap this up by showing the kids a song, an amazing song that my friend Mosti wrote, and it's pretty cool. He's unbeatable.
The environment can affect the physiological process. Rosenzweig and Bennett did a study to test if the environment affects the physiological process. they created two environments for the rats. One was enriched with toys and the other was deprived. Had to spend 30 to 60 days in their environment. Rats that were in the simulated environment had a thicker cerebral cortex and a heavier frontal lobe than the rats in the deprived environment, even though the research showed that the environment can affect the physiological process. The research, to some extent, could not be generalized. This is due to the different makeup. This is due to the different makeup of the brain that the humans have from the rats. This is due to the different makeup of the brain